Hello, welcome back. Today it's all about the monsters in your game. And we are returning to our previous scheduled plan of working our way through AD&D and feeding it into Shadowdark, the Shadowdark RPG, which is essentially just Dungeons and Dragons. So that's the plan for today. I am very much looking forward to the opportunity to share with you my thoughts about how we might build a monster, show you that process. I'm going to put up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll. Feel free to share your ideas, but I suggest grabbing some food, some drink, making sure you are comfortable, and we will get started in a second because I want to do this as quickly as possible so these live streams are easily referenced for those of you who are interested. Okay. Let's get a cracking, shall we? Hi, welcome to How to Dungeons and Dragons, or How to D&D. I normally introduce myself as How to RPG, but no, not today. Today it's very different. And we are going to be looking at the Ettin. We're going to make the stat block for the Ettin for the Shadowdark RPG, which is just Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, exactly. I know what you're thinking. Are you serious? Yes, I am. I'm quite serious. It is just Dungeons and Dragons. You call it a clone, call it what you like. It doesn't really matter. It's one of my favourite versions of the game. I would say my next favourite version of the game, if you're ever going to ask me, is Back Me. And then after that, it sort of gets messy. So, but I take a lot of inspiration from 5e. And I was actually part of the team, part of the people who play tested beta and alpha the monster manual for 5e. So it's not like I don't have some sort of concept of that stuff. But today we are going to ask that question: how would you go about making an Ettin for your Shadowdark game? Because there's no Ettin in the core rulebook. Like if you look, there's nothing there. So let's add one, shall we? It can't be that hard, surely. No, it can't. So this is what I'll put in. Hashtag. And so how would you build the Ettin stat block for Shadowdark RPG? And that is my question to you. So how would you build the Ettin? I'll make sure that's a big E because it's not a little e. And Ettin stat block for Shadowdark RPG. And so there we go. I have already prepared a lot of the material for today. So I'm going to go through how I do this. And then I'm going to come back and have a look at your comments and your feedback, okay? That's usually how I do this. I'm going to do this very quickly. About 20 minutes and we're done, because this is not like designing for 5e. It's much, much faster, which is good, right? It's a good thing. Okay, so he says, and like, is it really that? Is faster always better? Yeah, in my opinion, if you can do the maths fast, it means it's probably going to be better. Anyway, here we go. Shadowdark RPG. This is in conjunction with AJ Pickett, by the way. This is a project we've been working on. And this is just the monster lore stuff, so I'll whip past this like I normally do. Right, so the Ettin. I have described the Ettin as a two-headed giant with brownish skin and long, stringy, dirty hair. It's a combination of what I've read from AD&D first and second, looking at the 5e monster manual, looking at the 4e monster manual, and I don't really reference the 3.5 or version 3 one. So that's where I'm kind of getting things from. You could say this is also, is it going back to basic? I can't remember. I know I've got Rules Cyclopedia around here somewhere, behind me, I think it is. So that's what I thought. Now, dressed in dark brown animal hide or furs, so either one, with a turned up nose and large mouth. So that is to try to describe they are slightly different in nature to the other giants. Because basically an Ettin is a two-headed giant, right? That's the most defining factor that they have. So describing them with having a large mouth and a turned up nose is the only other thing I could find that sort of would help define them well. Okay, so the first thing is we need to decide what is the monster level. I went back to AD&D and I found that the number of hit dice they have is quite high. It's not a low number, and because of that, it came out at a grand total of 10. So I decided, okay, level 10 is the monster level. So that is the one I will select in this case, and we'll use that. Why do I do that and not use the 5e one? I guess that the reality is that I think that the challenge rating, the monster levels in 5e and how they're designed is shit, honestly. And I think we're better to go back to AD&D and basic D&D where it all kind of started. Since Shadowdark is just Dungeons and Dragons, better to go back to that source than to something that is acknowledged by its designers as being incredibly pointless. So yeah, it's got its purpose, but it's not a very good purpose because it doesn't achieve that purpose. so let's not chase that one. Now, in AD&D, they're considered chaotic evil. Now, in Shadowdark, there is no evil and good. There's just lawful, neutral, and chaotic. So that's why the alignment is chaotic. That's more in line with what you would expect from this creature. That's typical, right? You know, they don't have to all be that way, but this is for the Dungeon Master. And if the Dungeon Master's using the Ettin and your players aren't playing an Ettin, it doesn't matter. Like, you want them to be things that are kind of bad, because then it doesn't feel so brutal when the players butcher them and take their stuff. So that's why I've gone and done that, okay? All right, so we've got those stats there. Now, AD&D doesn't really state what the strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma are, or what their modifiers are. So it's better to go back to this book. Is go and find like a 4e book, probably not quite a good idea. 5e, I think, is probably the better way to go. Go back to that, and that is probably where we're going to get our numbers for this. Now, there are some provisos because there is a table that I use for making stat blocks. I've shown this to people before, and sorry, this is probably just a tiny bit big for you to be able to see properly, and I'll just make sure I line it up so you can actually see it. So this is designed by myself. It is a combination of what you find in the core rulebook for Shadowdark. You can find this up on Patreon in the free tier. All of the stat blocks that I make are in the paid tier. So free tier, you get the table so you can make your own stuff. Paid tier, you get the table and you get all the stuff that I make, right? And there's a lot. And there continues to be more. So you'll see right at the bottom there, it says level 10. And so what I'm looking for is sort of the parameters between what numbers do I expect their lowest stat modifier and their highest stat modifier. So the lowest stat modifier is probably going to be a -3. So it's not that low. And the highest one is going to be a +6. I also looked at the giants that she built for Shadowdark, which are not complete duplications of 5e. There is some stuff that's a little bit different, okay? And this happens for a variety of different reasons. So those are the numbers I'm kind of looking at. So what I went and did is I looked at the 5e stat block for the Ettin, and I broke it down and decided whether they were going to fall outside these parameters for a level 10 monster for Shadowdark. So strength is a +5 because it's got a 21, so that's +5, right? Players might not be getting that high, but the monsters can. And then their dexterity. Now the dexterity is actually an 8 or a -1 in 5e. But if you know anything about Shadowdark, you'll know that having a minus to a monster's this is dexterity, not constitution. Having a minus is a pretty big disadvantage, and I didn't want to do that. I thought that was quite low. I looked at all the other giants and decided that the Ettin doesn't need to be horrendously slower than all the rest. It didn't make any sense. So I decided I'll make it a 0. It's a 0 modifier rather than a -1 for dexterity. Constitution was a +3, which was a 17, so that's fine. We're going to keep that. And then the intelligence. Now, intelligence for these sorts of creatures, they're not supposed to be that intelligent. Even though they've got 2 heads, which means 2 brains, you'd think they'd be smarter. They're not necessarily that intelligent. But I did cross-reference them with the other giants from Shadowdark to see if it kind of falls within those parameters and whether I was kind of going too far out of the realm of what you would expect from a giant, because I don't want them to be the dumbest giants around, because I don't think that they are. But I do want them to stand out and have something that defines them. And so what you find when you look at Shadowdark giants is it is very, very rare to see a giant that has a really horrendously low intelligence. Hill giants have like a -2, right? And then the rest of them tend to be a lot smarter. So an Ettin kind of, it falls in line with being about as intelligent as a hill giant. And I can live with that. I think I can live with that. I think that makes quite a lot of sense. We'll go with that. But the difference is its wisdom. So the wisdom modifier for the Ettin and 5e is a 10, or a 0. 0 modifier, 10 is the score. And that's actually better than the hill giant. So even though they might not be that intelligent, they're wiser. They've got average wisdom. Whereas a hill giant is very, very stupid. It does stupid things, doesn't know a lot. That's why its numbers are the way they are. And then its charisma, it had an 8 for its charisma score, which is a modifier of -1. So those numbers there didn't really get changed. The wisdom I kept the same, the charisma I kept the same, and there we are. When it came to movement, these things are giants, they're large, and you'll notice that all the giants move double near. I don't like double near as a movement range, but because it is used in Shadowdark, I have to acknowledge it. So that's why I've given it double near. I didn't think it should be any shorter or smaller than the other giants. It's a large creature. It can move a lot faster than normal creatures. That's fine, so we do that. Okay, now we need to start looking at armor class. Well, the armor class in 5e is actually a 12. And if we have a dexterity modifier of 0, well, that's slightly larger. And you could say, well, it's because it's wearing armor. I decided in the end, because it says in 5e they've got natural armor, and they wear a lot of hides, but they're a bit tougher than other things. So it kind of felt like, okay, that could kind of make sense that maybe their skin is actually quite a lot tougher. I also cross-referenced and looked at all the other giants that were in the Shadowdark to see if there was anything that was sort of close to that. The only one that's closer is the likes of the giant goat and the hell giant and the giant goat. Those had like 12 and 11, and they were wearing leather armor. So we could say, well, hang on, a 12 doesn't seem to sort of fit in line with that. Maybe we need to make some adjustments. Do we need to give them leather armor? Are they wearing that sort of thing? And I'm of the opinion that you could do that. The problem is that then its armor class would be slightly less. That's the only thing, because leather armor is an 11 plus dexterity modifier. If it's got no dexterity modifier, then essentially it is going to be an 11. So this number here might be more in line with what Shadowdark is doing by going down a little bit. Okay, so now that I think about it, I'm going to change this. We'll make it 11. We'll make it the same armor class as a hill giant. We'll put in that they're wearing leather armor, which is basically their hides and their furs. That's providing the protection. And that falls in line with what you would expect from Shadowdark. Okay? All right, next. We can do its hit points because we now have the Constitution modifier. So grabbing a little calculator here. How do you calculate that sort of thing? Oh, by the way, if you're looking for armor class for a level 10 monster, like level 10, they don't usually tend to have armor classes as horrifically low as that. That's why I had marked it as 12. It's part of the reason why I had thought about doing that. So maybe we need to make some adjustments, because really this is not a level 8 monster and a hill. So this is one of those times where I might want to just make another adjustment. Let's go back to 12. and let's give it a Dexterity modifier. It's not the end of the world. It would be slightly faster than a hill giant, but it's not outside the parameters of other giants that tend to have at least a 1 or more in terms of Dexterity. And there's, there are other giants that are a little bit slower, but let's just do that. That makes it nice and consistent, so we've got that working, okay? This table here is a pretty good indication of where the parameters sit, so we're doing all right so far. Next, do the hit points, as I was mentioning. So let's go here. So with that, you'll notice that for hit points, it is a D8 for the monster, and then to calculate it, you take the average, which is 4.5. That's the average of an 8-sided dice, and you multiply that to the monster level, and then you add the Constitution modifier once only. Okay, just like characters. So that's what we need to do, right? So we go over here, grab our calculator, we go 4.5, multiply that by 10, we get 45, then we add the con modifier of 3, we get 48, which is why the hit points are 48 here. Okay, next, this is probably where things are going to get a little bit messy and a little bit confusing, or what's another word of another way of saying this? Maybe it's not going to fall in line with what you think, and that is the number of attacks. We need to determine how many attacks you get. Well, a monster of level 10 should get 4 to 5 attacks. That's how many attacks it's usually supposed to have. But even a giant with a level 10, that's level 10 in Shadowdark, none of them have 4 attacks or 5 attacks. They've all got 3 attacks. So even though this is sort of the guidance that the book provides, it states this, even the stat blocks don't really follow this. And the reason is they break that mold because they're trying to follow a lot of the 5e stat blocks. And I can assure you that 5e stat blocks are pretty bad. Whether 2014, 2024, or 2025 are a little bit better, they're still not great. Okay? A lot of the stuff has not been tested, so I would go with the 4 to 5. So that's why I've gone with 4 attacks. They tend to use a Morning Star. That's what the stat block says for 5e, like Morning Star. Okay, great, we've got that, understood. And then we're looking at the likes of how much damage we do. So if we look at Shadowdark and a Morning Star, it basically, if you're using a Morning Star, it's 2d10 for a giant. That's not for a normal humanoid, that's for a giant, right? Okay. So we know that that's their weapon. Now I've only put down 1 weapon, but because we've got so many attacks and because there are 2 heads, you might want to differentiate and have 2 different types of attacks. And this is where things can get a little bit interesting. We could go with 4 Morningstar attacks, 2d10, and that's fine. Okay, that would be it. We don't have to think about anything else. That would be it. Or what we can do is we can say, well, each hand is holding a different type of weapon. And if each hand is holding a different type of weapon, then we can play around with the type of damage that we're doing off them. You have to ask yourself the question, do you really want to do that? Is that something that's actually that important? And I'm going to say or suggest that maybe that is not the most important thing to consider. Maybe it is better and simpler to just go with use 1 type of weapon and that's it. But then again, you got 2 heads, and so you want to differentiate them. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this concept and instead have 4 attacks. We're going to have 2 attacks. And then we're going to go and we're going to build in another 2 attacks. So you're going to get 4 attacks in total. So go copy. And we're going to give them a different weapon. And now, what would be the weapon that I would use for this? Well, I'm going to go along here and say, I don't think it should be a battle axe like in 5e. I think what we do is we give them a great axe. Because whether you realize it or not, a great axe is kind of essentially the same amount of damage. But we could also give them a great club, which means they would have less damage. It would be slightly different, it would be slightly less. That's sort of to suggest maybe that one side of the monster is stronger than the other, that there's a dominant side. And we could sort of duplicate that if we wanted to by doing that. So that's one way of doing it. And, you know, another great thing about that is it sort of suggests that this monster is not hugely, it's not the kind of creature that is really advanced. So we could also go with Great Club. And I think Great Club's another option. Now, if we look at the damage output for a level 10 monster, it states a D12 or multiple dice. We're going to be using multiple dice, not doing a D12. So that's how we'll build it. So we're going to make this a Great Club to differentiate it, okay? Great Club. Now, for a Great Club, the Stone Giant uses a Great Club. It's a 2d8. So 2d8 is what we're going to go with. And if you look at the Great Club for any other giants, it's basically the same. Great Club, 2d8. And then you got your attack bonus. Okay. All right, now, so our damage is fine because it's at least a d12. And if it's more than one dice, then we're definitely getting that one d12 in there. So that's not a problem. So both those are all good. This differentiates the two sides of the monster. The fact that they've got two heads, that's all good. Now it's about the attack bonus. Now the attack bonus is a tricky one. Let's just go here and, yeah, space. The attack bonus is a tricky one. One of the first things I thought about when I was thinking about the Ettin was it's a level 10 monster. If you look at level 10 monsters in Shadowdark, most of the time it is probably best to have a higher end attack bonus between a 7 and a 10. I don't want to give them a 10 because that suggests that they're pretty good at attacking. And it's unusual to see an 11, okay? And then I was looking at the level 10 monsters and saying, okay, well, most of them have got at least a +9. Even if they've got a strength or dexterity of +4 or 5, it doesn't matter. They're still hitting with a +9. So they're actually pretty good. You know, they're not actually that bad at hitting something. Even a level 9 monster's got +9s. So I am of the opinion that it's better to either use the attack bonus as being at the same level as the monster. So if it's a level 10 monster, use 10 as your modifier for attack bonus. Or 1 point down or 1 point up. But when we get to level 10, it's different. We're not going to go 1 point up. 1 point down is good though. Okay? Either the same level or 1 point down. And because no giants in Shadowdark have a +10, I didn't think that the Ettin should. So what we're doing is we're going to take that concept and just make it a +9, which is why you'll see +9 for the Morningstar and +9 for the Great Club. And that'll keep our numbers fairly consistent right across the board. Okay, so that's the maths of it. Next, what sort of things should they have? An Ettin. I looked at the 5e stat block, and I also looked at AD&D, and one of the things that stands out is they have advantage on wisdom checks. So because they've got two heads, they're probably, you know, you're probably not going to be able to surprise them because there's always somebody awake. But they're also going to have advantage on wisdom checks because they've got two sets of ears, two sets of noses, two sets of eyes. They're better at doing all of that stuff. That is what makes the Ettin stand out, right? And the other thing is wakeful. There's we might call this alert. Can't be surprised. Would be probably another way of duplicating the fact that you just can't sneak up on this because there's always one of the heads awake, paying attention. That would probably be the other thing that would help determine the Ettin. Now that is 5e. Let's go back to AD&D because, as I said, a lot of these things still need to be based off the original monster. There are very few monsters in Shadowdark, should I say giants in Shadowdark, that have something like that. There's one that's got here alert, so the Cloud Giant's got alert. Advantage on checks to detect sneaking or hiding creatures. So that's very specific. I decided that I don't want to make it exactly like the Cloud Giant one, so I made it a little bit different, which is why I've got Perceptive, and we just made them really good at wisdom checks, okay? But that sort of helps define them. And then next, AD&D, first printing. This is looking at the Ettin, and the thing that I'm looking for is what helps to find the Ettin here. Looking through, and Ettin's attacks with both arms, its left hand directing the left arm, and the right head, the right arm. Blows from the former arm cause blah blah blah. So it talks about damage. They actually have stated that each one does slightly more. One does more damage than the other, suggesting that they do have a dominant side. The Ettin's heads are always likely to be alert. There we go. So they are difficult to surprise. There we are. So difficult is not the same as can't be. They've got difficult here. The problem is, how do you write that as a game mechanic? It's not really that easy. It's probably better just to eliminate it completely. And then it got a little bit of a description. So that's the first AD&D book. And then I also have the Monstrous Manual for AD&D second. And so looking at that and how this is built, there's a couple of things that stand out to me in terms of attack. Again, the fact that the left arm and the right arm do different amounts of damage, which is why we've duplicated that concept. The fact that it says here it has 2 attacks, but the problem is that there's a totally different sort of damage output, and a action economy is very similar in AD&D to Shadowdark, but it's not exactly the same. So we still need to make some slight difference to that. So they talk about clubs, spite clubs, which is basically a morning star. Okay, and then we start looking at some of the things that stand out for combat with this. And that is, having 2 heads is definitely an advantage for Ettins, as one is always alert, watching for danger and potential food. This means that an Ettin is surprised only on a roll of 1 on a D10, which means that the chance of surprising them is almost infinitesimal. It's so small. So just can't be surprised is probably cleaner. And Ettin has infravision, so we don't need to worry about that because they all have dark vision. In Shadowdark, all monsters do. And then it talks about its intelligence and its cunning fighter, so that's why we've got the wisdom a little bit higher. And the rest of it is kind of there. So we've got, I think, all of the main aspects of our Ettin that we need to have for it to work. And it's still a very small, simple stat block. Okay? All right, let's go and have a look at chat, see what you guys have got to say. I've been talking for almost 30 minutes. I do apologize. I probably over-explained everything. Jeeves. Oh, Jeeves, how are you doing? Fred Huber. Fred Huber is a patron and a moderator. Thanks for being here. And I noticed that you have a little crown #1. So does YouTube now figure out who is in my live streams more than anybody else? And they've decided it's got to be Fred Huber, which is probably true. So yes, nobody said very much. Strong, brutal, not highly intelligent, always hungry. Well, those things are a very narrative. But we've got not intelligent. We've done that mathematically. So good, cool. Do you want to make a Shadowdark RPG monster? Okay, it says yes, 66%. Just watching, 33%. Now, you can take the same principle that I've done here with Shadowdark and that table that I used to make that monster. You could take those same principles over to 5e to do your own Ettin or 2-headed giant. And I don't know if you realize it, but there's actually a link on Patreon. You'll find a table that I made for 5e or 2025 monster creation to make a stat block for that. Quick, easy table. You can port that over and use that rather than the Shadowdark table if you wanted to. And I believe it is part of the free tier for my Patreon, so you don't have to be a paid member to get the 5e conversion table. That's not a problem at all. And it's updated. It'll be a lot tougher, so you can grab it if you want to. Also, too, as part of what I've been doing, I have also created a player's expansion for Shadowdark RPG with 10 classes and 17 ancestries that I made with AJ Pickett. I made it. I was a primary designer. Mitchell Reed, Wally DM, and David Bailey. And that is on Patreon, on DriveThru RPG. It's in the description. You can find a link to it. Pay what you want. Go try it out if you're playing Shadowdark, or even if you just want to see how it's done. I'm saying this because tomorrow I'm going to make a Shadowdark class. I've made 5e classes on this channel, but we're going to make a Shadowdark class tomorrow. And next week we're doing another monster, and I believe it's going to be something. I can't remember. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but it doesn't matter. We've covered everything we need to do. I think it's time to bug out, if you ask me. I think it's time to leave. You get on with your day, I get on with my day, and everybody is cool, right? Yeah, sure. Hey, thank you for watching and listening. A huge thank you to everybody who took part in the poll. I do appreciate it. Thank you to all of my patrons who support me on Patreon, because without you, I really wouldn't be able to continue. You know, all the people who have paid memberships make a big difference, because YouTube is tough to do, and publishing anything nowadays is tough to do. And I want to thank Fred Huber and Jeeves. Thank you very much for being here and your comments. Okay, so wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbors. And till next time, from How to D&D, keep rolling those 20s.